Thank you everyone for letting me show you a little bit of things. What we're going to do today is I'm going to turn trees. I won't call them necessarily Christmas trees because you can keep them up year round. A lot of people like these, they display them year round, so I just sort of call them trees. We got into this. I've been doing these for a couple of years now. These were some of my earlier designs, very, very basic. They came out okay, but not great. Some of the things over time I learned was improve on the foot. This is pretty clunky looking, wasn't great. This was a little better, but still clunky looking. Just I wasn't real happy with it and started working on more designs. So that's one little bit about this. And then I finally came up with something like this design with a foot. So it's fairly uniform in length, but also what we'll see as we go down through here when I do this is these are actually spaced out a little bit longer as you go down to give normal look of a tree, so they're not evenly spacing when I make my cuts. So you'll see that part. And every once in a while when you're doing this, what is nice about what a lot of people I'll say like about this type of tree is that they're slightly undercut on the bottoms, which gives it a little more depth to the tree presentation. It looks like everything goes way up under. It doesn't will go, it's just maybe an eighth or 3/16 of an inch under, but it gives a different dimension to the tree. And as we go in, I'll show you a little more detail about that. You can make them all sizes. This is a little tree. It actually started out this size until I had a catch, and you figure out how to do repair. So that's one of the things we'll talk about. I mean, it's always, one of the guys that was telling me, Tim was saying is, you get into this, all of a sudden, experiment. Don't be afraid to break it. It's only a piece of wood. Don't start with your best piece of wood. Learn, on something that's a little more easy to do. But again, is figure out then ways to take something that's not so great and broken. What happened was I broke off one of the rings, just not paying attention. It happens. And it broke off and just cracked enough that I thought it's not going to work anything. So then I thought I can make a little smaller one, but then you proportionally turn everything else down to match. So I thought, let's see what happens. And again, you can make these all sizes. I don't have any with me because I've given them out, but I've got some that are close to about 22 inches tall. They get a little bit wider. That gets a little more challenging. So the bigger is more challenging. The smaller is a little bit easier. You've got more, in this size, you've got much more solid mass behind it, so you're not going to get a lot of vibration that you'll get when you get a longer piece. But what I found is around a 12, 13 inch long piece makes a very nice sized tree, gives you a little bit of extra piece if you need it at the end, and it doesn't get too large for somebody just starting out trying to turn these, that you can get it done in a reasonable amount of time, relatively, I don't want to say safely, but relatively without damaging it with the vibration, and it's a good starting point. So we'll get into that. And then after I finish turning the tree, I'm not doing any sanding here because I don't have a respirator system for sanding, so I won't sand, but I've got one that's all pre-set up. I'll show how to finish it and then how to part it off on each end, because that's the next part. How do you get it off? I got this piece done. How do I get it off of there? So let's get started on this. Cover a couple things on safety. This is your friend, everybody. So anybody who doesn't have one, please think about getting a helmet for your face. It's always simple how simple little chips come back and hit you in the helmet. They can come up underneath your eyes. Safety glasses is the other thing. For most people, everybody's wearing glasses. I see a lot of you out there. Get prescription safety glasses. Mine are prescription. What a lot of people don't realize is they're heavily subsidized. So if you go to your optometrist and when you're getting your glasses, say, hey, what's the price on safety glasses? They're about a third of the cost of your regular glasses just because they're safety glasses. That's the only difference. So easy to get, good thing to wear. A lot of times I end up wearing these all day long just because I'm used to them. They got the same exact prescription as my other glasses, so I wear them quite a bit. What we're going to start out with is I got to set up on the lathe. It's just basically about a 12-inch long square blanket cherry. I picked this piece up just because it's simple. Cherry's nice wood to practice on. It's very straight grained. I want to say in some cases it's very forgiving when you're turning. A lot of the trees I make are usually I don't have any because they are all gone, is curly maples, a lot of different curls, a lot of burls in them, things like that. Those are nice. People gravitate to them. They'll grab them. They'll take them. The plain ones like this, not so great, but good ones to practice on. And again, the wood's very nice to work with. So what I've got here on the lathe is just basically I put centers on each end and got it started, and we'll rough it out real quick. And there's not a lot to this part, just sort of a quick rough out. We'll turn it, and then we'll start into making the rest. And typically if I'm doing a grain mark, I'm going to look for it. If there's a lot of grain, a lot of color in it, which end do I want that to see where it's going to show up? Is it going to be down on the lower leaves or is it on the top? If it's all on the outside of the wood and it doesn't look like there's much on the inside, I may flip that around and use this part as the base so that I want to get a lot of the color that's available out of it. But let's get started. We'll do a little bit. Does this sound okay if I do my check, or is it okay? All right. Now, let's see if I can figure out how to work this guy. And don't ask what speed I turn at. I just turn at a speed I'm comfortable at. Sometimes it can be very slow. Sometimes it can be pretty quick. And question, how many are new here? I mean, new to turning? I'll talk about something real quick while I'm doing this. I just started off because I don't want to just assume you know everything. A lot of things are, we got a bevel on the tool here. This is this part edge. They're sharpened. It's just remember what we call the ABCs is how I was always taught. So you get your anchor, then your bevel contact, then your cut. So ABC, remember always get your tool down on the bevel. And at this point, I can bring it up to a point where it's low, and I know I'm hitting the cut, and it's just going to spin, and then I can just, basically, I'm going to bring up the back of the handle to start my cut. And a lot of times, it's hard to see, I'm keeping this, my hand's going to be down around my hip level. That gives me basically an extra point of contact. That gives you a lot of control, because you're not having your arm out here just going wherever. You're actually just rocking back and forth on my hip. So you'll see a lot of times, my feet are pretty much parallel to the lathe, and I'm just rocking back and forth as I make these cuts. And again, every time I stop it, I'm always going to turn the lathe. I like to use a rheostat where I'll turn it all the way off. The one-ways don't do that, but I'll always turn it all the way down before I start up so I know what to expect once I start again. And I'm just in the process, just trying to bring this pretty close to round. And I can listen to the wood, I can tell. And if you think you're close, you can reach in from underneath. Don't do it from the top, and I can still feel a little bit of rough. You do for anyone that's new. Reaching on from underneath, the worst it's going to do is grab my finger and pull it towards the tool rest. It's going to pull it away. I won't get hurt. If you come this way, you always run a risk of being pulled down into the tool rest, which is really dangerous at that point. And I'm almost there. I can tell where I can hear the wood now. It's very uniform sound, so I'm pretty close to round. Again, I'm going to shut this down, wait till it stops and move my tailstock. And again, I always say, follow those rules that people say. Shut your equipment off when you're moving stuff around. Things can go really wrong really quick on a lathe, and just practicing some of those little basics can really make it much safer to use it. All right. Where are we at? There we go. And what I've got now, I've got a nice cylinder. I know it's pretty close. I'm not so worried that it's completely round, but it's close enough. And this is the point where you're going to do two things. I'm going to make a spigot on the far left end, if that's the one I want, or you can stop it, look at it, and decide if you want to rotate it, depending on what grain pattern you see. And we'll end up putting this end in the chuck, and then this end, the tailstock end, I can go to a taper now. You have a choice. You can say, I'll just put it into a chuck, start my taper, or I can taper it down now. A lot of times I've still got it here, so I'll just make a taper on this. And a lot of times I just like to use my roughing tool almost like a bidan, just because it's easier than doing it the other way. And I can take a lot of wood off very quick. And I'm just making a very rough taper just by pushing in. And I'll come back out and chew that up in a minute. So now I'm at a point where I can bring my my tool rest in a little bit. And what I want to do is I'm going to create a nice angle on here. I can bring it up close. I got to raise it up just a hair. And what this will do is it gives me almost a straight edge effect, so now I can draw, because right now I know I'm straight, and then I got a really rough looking curve. But I can come in this direction. And I can use this, basically the tool rest is my straight edge to get down to this end. I'm not going to take it down quite a lot of ways. And again, you can do this when you put it into your lathe chuck. You can put this end in there, but it's really just to get it to a rough, usable starting point. That's probably pretty good, at least to get started. So it gives just a point to give you a cone shape. And a lot of times you can look at it and decide if you got good grain, which way you want to go with it. And then what we'll do now is for our chuck, I'm just going to double check my calipers. I've got a 2-inch chuck that I'll use. And with a parting tool, I can cut a taper, and again, I'll cut the spigot for the chuck. Did I lose the mic, or is it? Oh, there we go. And we can do that. And again, when you do your calipers to bring them in, for those while I got the lathe off, is you'll bring them in from this side. If you come down, you run a great risk of going through too quick, getting it caught in between the metals, between the spinning wood and the tool rest. So again, it's more for safety. You're going to bring it in this direction. That way you're not going to let gravity pull it in too fast. So I got pretty much just basic a quick part, and I just like to take the corners off so I don't get caught on them. And now we're at a point where now I can take in nothing fancy on a chuck. I use Nova chuck. It doesn't really matter. As long as your jaws are measured. I'm trying to, ideally when you put your jaws in there, there's a machine cut that's usually about 1/8 of an inch. You can measure it and get exacted. I just eyeball it. But what this is doing is that now I get uniform grip all the way around from that. So that's why I don't have the jaws way out. Ideally the jaws are set up basically on the inside and the outside to create a uniform circle. That's when you get your maximum grip. You won't get any rocking. And if you're dealing with some kind of a spalted or a punky wood, you're not going to get uneven pressure where you could have just a corner or an end of the chuck pushing out to basically crack off your piece of wood. So it makes a little bit of a difference there. But think about those when you use your chucks, think about those measurements, because it does make a difference on how well it holds your wood in. So I got that in, and then And as I got it in, probably you can see right there, there's a little gap. I do that a lot of times intentionally because I don't know between how close those are going to be, but I want to use my headstock to realign my front end because I've already got that there. I'll just have this snug. Tighten this guy down good so he's not going to move. And then I'm going to snug up, basically drive the piece in on its final part and then tighten it, because then I know I've got as close as I could get to being a true center. And I'll make sure these are pretty snug. Now, as we start turning, the one thing is you already noticed on these trees, I'll just grab one here. This gets really thin up here, really thin. So the last thing I want to be doing is having all this vertical pressure in there, because it's going to want to try and bow the piece of wood as I get going, and it's going to snap it. So what I've done is, because now I know I got a good solid drive point on here being mounted to a chuck, I'm going to back this off just so I can have a little bit of, I'll be able to grab this guy with my fingertips, and it's going to be able to stop it. So I know that it's going to have a little bit of space. You'll get a little bit of chatter, but not much. But I know now if I turn, I've got really no vertical pressure in here. But what I did before this, even now you can do it, is drive the chuck in, or drive your tailstock in a little bit harder, so you got a good, I'll say, purchase point, so that you're well seated into it, and then just back off a little bit. So now I've got that, and I can tighten that down. I know it's not going to go anywhere, and you don't have to think about this at a later time of really when all of a sudden you realize your wood is bowing on you a little bit. So I'm going to come up here, reset this. Looks good. I'm just going to do a little more taper on this to make sure it looks the way I want it to. And again, it's the anchor bevel contact. I'm just going to come down here. I'm still roughing this out. Just to get down, I can go a little bit farther. And you will note sometimes if you're doing a taper like this, especially with a roughing gouge, it's going to want to try and grab it, and it really wants to take you and spiralize all the way down the side. So you got to just be careful how you're pulling it so that you don't allow the tool to get grabbed, because it will want to grab and take it down that direction. So it's almost, similar to what you might see in the catch. So that's why you can just be careful, take lighter cuts at this point. And down at this end, I'm going to leave this a little bit proud like that, so he's in good shape. And now I think we're at a good point where we can just true it up a little bit with a spindle gouge. I've got a spindle gouge here. It's basically a very simple one. One of the things I do it is I take the heel, what we call the heel of the spindle gouge, and I actually grind it way back, so it's very relieved and round. Because as we get into these later on, hang on one second, when we start doing this, it'll be easier to see, is I'm going to be coming in and undercutting it, and it's the same thing, the effect when you get a bowl, when they teach you on the bowl gouges, grind the heel off a little bit so that you don't get these little ribs created by the back edge of the tool. That's the sharp portion of it. You'll see that if you start doing these and you don't have that, you'll actually, if it's real faint, you'll see real lines, but again, mine's only probably 1/16 of an inch, 3/32 of an inch of a heel now. I'll still be able to see the lines in there, but you can sand those out a little bit. But it allows me to get deeper into the tree without creating any problems, and I get a good angle. Another tool you could use, I do have it, is you can use more of a detail gouge that will allow you to get in a little bit deeper if you wanted to, but I prefer this just because it's easier to handle. Works for me, so I like that part. A lot of you probably haven't or may have noticed already, I'm turning this all left-handed. Makes it a little bit easier for the left hand because we're going this direction versus this direction. So that's the only reason. I'm left-handed, but I do turn a lot right-handed just because I can. And but this one I found after talking with a lot of people saying, hey, it does make a big difference using your left hand to turn it. So it's a good skill builder to learn how to use your left hand for turning at that point. So let me trim this down, and then I'll make some lines on it. We can see where we're going. And what I'm going to do then, I'll take this down to a fairly sharp point, but you'll see where it's at. And again, I'm not turning this back part because this is what I'll call what we'll put the tree trunk part to it. So I don't care about that at this point. I'm just worried about just creating a nice uniform cone for the tree. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect at this point. This is just to get it nice, fairly smooth, to do some pencil lines on it and have a nice general shape. And again, I'll take that to a fairly small part, and I'm going to leave a fairly good-sized amount on the bottom just for a little balance. It also helps when you're turning it off. It gives me a little more space to work with. And when we're putting the tip in here, I can show it on this. The tip of my tool, my live center, is probably protruding about 1/8 of an inch in here. Well, it's also crushing the grain below that. So I always use the rule of thumb about 1/4 of an inch of blank space, because you'll see that damaged fiber mark from your actual point of your live center actually pushing into that. It's going to crush the grains beyond its own length, just because wood's got to move out of the way to give it. So at this point, we're ready to do some marks on it. And I start generally, just for this size trees, for any size, you'll start at whichever size you need to do, so you can find out what you do. But about 1 inch from this mark, and this gives me a little bit extra from when I'm marking here to here to cut the end off, so I get a little extra so I don't plan. And then as I go, I'm going to start a little bit shy of that length. I'll probably do maybe 7/8 of an inch. And then as I extend my lines out, I'm going to go maybe add a 1/16 of an inch or so to it, and just keep adding a little bit of space. So when I'm out here now, I'm already about 1 inch, and I'll go to 1 inch and maybe 1 1/8, and then an inch and not quite 1 1/4 inch, but somewhere in there. And then I'll hit 1 1/4 inch. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Trees they all grow randomly, so that's the one thing that's nice to look at. But I'm looking so that once I get a pattern down here, I'll put these on there. It's pretty close. You can see it a little better with some spinning it around here. Let's see. You'll be able to see. I think you should be able to see these lines. If not, I can put them on with a marker. Are those visible, I think, on that? Okay. You can see these lines on here. So that's basically my cut points for each of the branches. So I'll cut in, and that tells me where I'm going to stop. That just sort of gives a good layout. It's interesting when you first look at that, it looks like they're almost evenly spaced, so you want to say, I'm going to go out and make them a little bit longer. But as you get into this, when we start cutting deeper, you're going to realize because of the width, it's more, I'm not sure exactly what the whole phenomenon is, but it's just optics. As you cut in deeper, it's going to you can cut in a little deeper on the bigger branches underneath, so it's going to give more depth to the branch. So it'll actually make them look like they're spaced out even farther. And there's 2 ways now to cut the branch. You can cut it, a lot of times I'll just cut it because I like to stay with one tool. I'll cut them all when I'm using my spindle gouge. To start them, it can be difficult. You might get this point where you're going to get a catch. Either way, it's going to rock. And what can be frustrating when you first start out doing these is you get that catch, and you're actually trying to finish up a cleanup spot and just realize you just destroyed a whole, I'll call it a branch set. You can use a parting tool. It can make it a lot easier to start it off. I'll show you how to do that with a couple of these, and then I'll go back to spindle gouge. The parting tool is great. It's a good starting point. It gets you to do it. You still have to come back and clean up that spot because you're going to get a lot of visible tear out from the parting tool. It's great for parting stuff off. It's not good for the tear out, which is the downside, but it's a good way to start out. And basically, whoops, I want to start one thing. I want to get my tool rest really to the same direction as my piece of wood at this point. So I'm going to be now, instead of running parallel to the lathe ways or the bed, I'm going to be really looking parallel down this slant here on the back side. It makes it a little bit easier to follow. And again, parting, we're going to come on the back side of the lines, and I want to take that down just a little bit. That's probably the other reason why I just stay with one tool. I don't have to adjust the tool rest as much. But I'm going to come into that first one, and I'm just going to take and basically just do a little bit of a parting tool there. So I got my spot. I'll do the next one just so you can see it again. But you also notice there's a lot of vibration on there because I am not loose on here, but this one I can't turn anymore. It's snug, but if I probably grabbed it good, it's I know we're pretty close to that. Let's see, off to readjust. But you can see you get a little bit of tear out when you're doing that. But what these two spots have given me now is I've got a point where I can actually come in. I have my bevel point. So again, when you're first starting out, you want a bevel. I can bring in my bevel. I've got bevel. I can hold the tool there. I know it's not going to want to jump and spiralize down my tree. So now I'm not going to cut that first. I'm going to cut from the back side. Now, the goods and bads are, now that I've cut that spot, those two pieces, is I have to remember when I get to those to slow down so I don't go too fast past those to get that. But now it's just basically an anchor and a bevel, and I'm going to rock my way. You can see how I'm just sort of rocking the tool into place, and I'm going to get down there, undercut, and that's, you're hearing some vibration. It's just, I'm used to it. It's still not, it's snug in there, but we're getting a smaller piece, so you'll get vibration as you get smaller diameter piece of wood. And you get vibration for two reasons. Something I learned from George. Too much bevel pressure will cause a lot of vibration on your wood. So if you're getting a lot of vibration, back off your tool a little bit. You just want it to rub. You don't want it to press. And that will help. And or your tool's a little bit dull. It's not cutting well, so it's actually grabbing. Or your piece is loose in the front end, or you're just too small of a piece. But we're okay at this part. So I'm just going to turn it. And you notice the other part I'll show, I haven't turned this end. I'm going to leave him for later because I like that extra little piece of wood at the end. That way I don't have to worry about him breaking. Now I'm going to come in to clean this off. Basically I'm turning on the other end. I'm going to come in at almost 90 degrees, and then I can come in. Now I'm looking down almost when you see me lean over. I'm going to look straight down. So what I'm trying to do is also get the tool so that it's basically, I want to say, I'm not sure the right word, I'm straddling my center point. So that way as I make my cut, I know I'm not going to get the tail part of my tool catching on the wood, and I can come straight in. You can do this up to a point. Once you get in 2 or 3 down, then you have to be careful because you're going to be at a diameter where that's not going to be as effective for you. You're going to get I'll say the heel of the tool is going to actually hit, so you can just be aware of that. So now this is a point where it's just a series of similar cuts where I'm just going to come in and I can cut underneath it, and then I'll do the next one. And I'll just keep repeating the process. And when I say a good skill builder doing these is because you're repeating the same process of the same turn, I guess, multiple times. So it's a good way just to develop that habit. And you can see I'm keeping my arm fairly well locked to my side, so this back part of my elbow is not really moving. I'm using my body to make that turn. And at the end I'll come in from the back side then. Again, this just clears this out a little bit and I can undercut just nicely. Now when you're cutting these, it's nice to have nice crisp ends. Check them periodically so they don't, you can have I'll say a rough spot and you might have a little rough edge on them, but you don't want them razor sharp. So right now they're a bunch of basically little meat slicers. That's what I call them because I've gotten cut on them. Later on I'll go back and I want to sand these sharp edges down so that it's crisp but feels good when you're handling it. If you have something that's way too sharp, you feel it and you're like, that doesn't feel good. And somebody looking at these will feel the same thing. So just something to be prepared of. And that's pretty much, if I'm just going to cut with a tool, I'm just going to come in again at a 90-degree angle, sort of press in a little bit on this angle on it, not coming straight into the center of the axis. And then I'll just be another series of cuts and coves to create the next row. And I'm not taking them quite to the edge because I know when I'm going to come in with the tool, I can come in from the other angle straight in and undercut. And it's a much easier way to do a cleanup that way. This will be the area where you're going to feel the most vibration just because you got a very thin section of the piece on the right hand side and you're still out of ways from the chuck on the left hand side. So you'll feel that vibration come in. So a lot of times it's just a lot of light cuts to finish these pieces up. And this is where I can now come in with this and I can bring my tool all the way in to here, and basically I'm just getting a bevel rub, but I'm not getting that burnishing effect from the heel being too long. I'll just come in there, undercut that one more time, and we should have a decent look. And I check them every couple. If I inspect them to make sure there's no little chip outs. Every once in a while you might get a chip out, the wood just comes out, or a rough spot. You can throw them up, so if I get one or two down, I can always go back and clean one up. If I damage one of these, it gives me a little bit of, I'll say, room to go back and I'll say balance it out. As the case of that real little tree is, you can come back and balance it out by turning the other ones down a little bit. But once you get too far out, you don't want to go back and turn them just because you're going to have way too much vibration or a good chance of breaking your piece that you started on. So again, I always start with the first part. I'll make that little bit of a cut just to get it started so I can see where I'm at. And then I can come in, and it's just a bunch of series of cove cuts, deeper, progressively deeper. And again, if you notice, I am trying to do that, so I'll start with an open tool, what they call open, and as I roll it in, not only am I going up and down, bringing it up and over, I'm actually rolling it so that I close it at the end, which gives a little bit nicer cut. It gets you the finish point, and then it allows me to use just the point to get to the end, so because you're tucking down into a corner, so that's something just to be aware of. But again, you start open, and as I turn, I'm actually then, as I get towards the end, I'll start to close it up a little bit so that I'm just getting the point of the tool into that area. And then I'm going to come into the back side. And one of the things when you're doing these is you're not only looking at the proportions, I'll show you here, it's easier to show it as we go. We're not only looking at the proportion of the outer edge of the tips to make it look uniform, I'm also trying to do these undersides where the branches go in so that they're looking uniform too. So in other words, I don't want them all real narrow on the inside, just because that's not what a normal tree would look like. I want them proportionally tapered out, so as you get larger out, it looks like two different sets of conical shapes that you're going to follow all the way out to the end of your tree at that point. So that's something I look for. And again, if you decide, I can see where I'm not quite on the line, but I thought that's good. I can be left or right of the line. I don't have to be exact on it, and I can start my next one to keep cutting the tree, and I'll keep doing that shape. But again, it's in progressively larger spaces. And if you get too much vibration, again, just back off the tool a little bit and take lighter cuts. I'm taking right now just a fairly heavy cut because I'm trying to rough that out. But again, if you're starting it and you're new, you can take a much lighter cut. And again, I'm just going to keep taking it down in an area that looks good. This is also a good spot to practice your bevel rubbing effect. You'll get that idea where you know you can leave it there, and it's just, you know which way to pull the tool just to start a little bit of the cut. And you can practice without having it rub too much. And also, here's another thing when you're doing it, you can see probably between these two right here, this one was a little bit farther in, so I want to come back to the second one out here, and I want to take it in just a little farther to make the taper look more uniform between the two, so it doesn't look like it's I'll say an offset tree. Try to keep the uniformity. So I'm going to come back and do this. This is something that you'll look between the two pieces. And you'll notice that there's a lot more vibration now because I got a lot less material behind the tree. That looks pretty good. So that just trims it up, makes it look a little bit nicer. And again, I'll make another cut. And again, another set of codes. keep cutting just a little deeper on this one. And again, I'm going to do as I get down to the last final rows of trees, or limbs, I guess we'll call them branches, I'll undercut them a little deeper than the prior ones just because you got more room to which to undercut them, and it just looks a little bit nicer, I believe. So I can keep doing that part. And I'll just take a little bit finer cuts at this point so that you get a nice clean cut. And now I'm just trying to work this piece right into the corner to give a nice sharp edge at the corner where the top row and the lower branches meet. And once you get into that edge, you have to be really careful because you will get a lot of burnishing effect from your tool. I could see a line that's probably not too visible. I just cleaned it up, but it basically burned the wood. You can see, I could see it from here. It's probably not visible on the camera, but when you see that, you'll just come back in and clean that piece up. I'll do one more cleanup on this one, and I'm getting a lot of chatter, so I'm one who advocates sharpening your tool before you really need to sharpen it or before it gets dull. So I'm going to take a second just to sharpen this up a little bit to do the final cuts. Probably don't need to sharpen all that often, but it's easy enough, and I know when you guys do that class, I think is it next month or coming up, it makes a big difference on getting that. So give me 1 second. And I would say using jigs is a good way for anybody new to start to sharpen. I think just about every pro turner now advocates using jigs, and there's a few that can turn by hand, can sharpen by hand, but it's so difficult to keep it very accurate and get the same exact part. So I just use a jig, and it takes just a few seconds. And again, I don't take any more off the heel. That was just that much to sharpen it. I don't take any more off the heel because I'll take it down a couple of, I'll say, layers of sharpening. But again, it's just such a little bit of sharpening. I'm only taking and making that bevel just a little bit wider than normal, but I'm okay. But I can see I've got a lot of, it's hard to see on the camera here, I've got some chatter in here that I'll come back and clean that up. I could hear it, and it's very visible. It just looks like just chatter marks that you see on that. And if you get if you hear the bevel chatter, you'll see it. That's the one thing I always learned. If you can hear it, you probably can see it on the finish of your piece of wood. And it's a whole lot easier to turn it out than it is to try and sand it out. That looks pretty good, I think. And then we'll get the final one here. Again, I'm just more roughing this out just because I know I got a number of decode cuts to do yet. But I'm just looking to know if your tool's nice and sharp, you're going to get these nice little wispy fibers. That's telling you you're getting good cuttings. If you're getting, I don't know if I find something. If you're getting something that looks more like sawdust, it's time to sharpen your tool. And you may have noticed down here you don't hear, well, I did sharpen the tool, but also you're not hearing as much chatter because we're getting closer to the chuck, which is really making a lot of vibration dampening effect on the wood, which is what we really want when you know you got good holding spot. I'm just going to clean this cove up a little bit. Undercut. And you notice something I didn't point out, when I start to do the final undercuts, I'm not coming all the way out to the very edge because it's just too hard to catch that edge and not take a piece off. I'm coming just inside it, maybe an eighth, 3/16 of an inch in with a bevel, and then I'm just turning my tool inward and lifting it back just enough to start a cut again. If you try to start your bevel right from the very edge, it's a very good chance you're going to get just a little bit of break off on this, which is not what you want. So now, at this point, before I do any more, because I'm going to start taking this off, oops, forgot to turn power off there, is I'm looking at, I see one little spot here I want to clean up. This is just a bad tool mark there. I'll clean that up. The rest looks okay, something I could probably sand out. I'll clean this one up and then we'll readjust our tool rest to do the rest. At that point, we're not going to turn anymore. I will clean this piece up at the same time when I do this one. And now we're going to be down in the meat of the chuck spot, and this will be okay to work with. But it's always good to inspect your work every once in a while. That way you can see your marks where they're at. A little more speed here. Now, I turned it up to the point where I can feel the vibration, so that means I'm just a little more than I wanted to be at. If you got your lathe and you're feeling vibration, adjust the speed. You can go up or down. You might be like what they call a harmonic, and you're just going to get that vibration for that particular piece of wood where you're at, just because of inconsistency in the wood, things like that will make it a little bit off balance. So turning it down will usually do it. You can turn the speed up though too, because that can always, just a little bit at a time, can take you out of that vibrations mode. Now I'm going to take this piece off. I'm going to double check this. I'm going to loosen him up just a hair. So I want to make sure you're not going to bend. And I can see where I can literally hold them with my thumb. I'll take it back just to where it's a little bit tight. There we go. And that'll hold it. So I know I'm not got that much directional pressure into the axis of the tree at this point. This is where, if you have a cone center versus a cup type center, which this is, you have to be a little bit careful so you don't have too much part that you can end up cracking your piece of wood. Oh, there I got a catch. I'll go this other way to around it. Try again. I'm just getting that edge there. There we go. I'm just taking a little more off so I have a place to undercut when I'm ready to take the end off. And then I can round that out and I'll be good for that. Now, I'm going to leave that there. We'll do one check. Finally, yeah, we got off. We'll do one check, make sure everything else looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a rough spot there, but I'll leave that be for demonstration purposes. And I'm going to come over here and we'll cut the trunk off. We'll get that ready. And again, checking the distance. This time I'm going to turn the tool rest perpendicular to the ways because that's the way I want to use everything. And I'm going to take off a little more. We'll see. Here's a good example. I'm going to take off a little bit more length just because the tree sits up a little bit higher than a normal branch would be. So maybe not quite twice that distance between the branches, but about 1.5 times the distance. Again, it's eyeball, so you don't have to worry about that. And then I usually make the foot about maybe half to 2/3 the diameter of the lowest branches. It gives it a good perch side to side. It seems to be pretty stable. And to me it looks pretty nice. So we'll make that particular shape. Make sure we're all locked in good. All right, and then I'll start with this one with a parting tool just because it's easier to make those cuts quickly. And I'm not going to be directly on the last branch. You can see where I left a little bit of thickness. I'll come back in with my spindle gouge and clean that up. But I can take this in fairly quickly. And a lot of times I just use my parting tool. I don't have a bidan. I mean, you could use a bidan or something like that. But I just prefer to use a parting tool to make these cuts. It's quick, it gets me to about where I want to be. And because I've got the chuck right close to the mass of wood, I can apply this pressure pretty good and I can trim it down. And I'm going to slow this. You can see now I'm making a series of almost like tapers to come out so I can identify where I want to create my foot and what I want it to look like. And I'll take a lot of this wood out of the way just to let me look at the shape I want to get. Let's take that corner off, and then I think I'll take a little bit more. And now I'll come in with take a little bit more off the back so I can clear out the bottom and underneath. I don't need this anymore. And I can come in now with my spindle gouge and then clean that up fairly quickly. And just basically I'm going to create that shape of that trunk that I want. And the trunk, you'll want it to be a fairly small diameter. I want to say fairly small. Just look and see what looks good when you're doing that, but definitely smaller than probably in the range of the upper size of the branches, but I would say maybe 3/4 of an inch or so in diameter. Just, it looks like a trunk. That's what you want it to look like, but have some stability to hold the tree up. And then at the same time I'll do this. Now, you have to remember, I've left this last branch intentionally thicker at the end so I can be careful. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to take it down so that you have to remember that when you're doing your, I'll say, viewing of how you want to create your trunk. So I'll come in and clean this last little bit up. And now I'm going to undercut this. I'm going to slow that cut down. I'm getting a little deep on it. I just don't want all that chatter since I have just a little bit of a stem to work with. You'll get more vibration now that we're down to that smaller diameter piece right there. That looks pretty good. Now before I finish up the tree, I just want to check that bottom piece to make sure it looks sufficiently good. Yeah, that looks like a good clean cut. And again, these are a little bit sharp, but I'm going to come back when we sand them. We'll clean those up a little bit so they're not so sharp, because this one definitely feels really sharp. If you were to hit your finger on it while spinning, it would definitely cut you. I think the rest of the branch looks, or the base of the tree looks pretty good just from what I'm looking at. And now I can come in here and now it's just more of a, take a little bit off and take a look at it and decide if that looks like about the diameter that I like. Again, I do it, no two trees are the same, so there's not any real measurement in there other than about 2/3, half to 2/3 the diameter. And so I'll come in now with a parting tool just to clean up the base. I usually leave about maybe 1/4 to 3/16 of an inch for the base just to get it started, and I'm going to go straight in. And then what I'll do at the end is a slight undercut so that the base stands nicely, and that's the big difference that helps make a piece stand upright, is undercut it so that it's always resting on the edges and not somewhere in the center as the wood, ages, warps, things like that. It won't be much on that end, but it'll be a little bit there. And I'm just going to get some of this out of the way because I want to get under there in a minute. So just clean up some of that. And then I'll undercut this part a little bit. I do it for two reasons. One is I can clean the bottom up nicely at this point before I part it off, and then I'll show you how for finishing I do it. But one of our members always taught me to, when you do your work, put your signature on it. It does two things for you. One, you give it some recognition that you did it, but also when you put in your signature on it, it makes you feel like you want to do your best work. So when you're doing it, I sign everything I make, because that way I know I'm going to give it the best I can do and make it a nice piece of work. So now I'm just down there. I'm just getting this just out of the way so I can do it. And then I'm going to come back in. Typically I'll use a detail gouge just because it's easier. The only difference between the regular spindle gouge and the detail is I have some much sharper angle I have on it. I take the heel off on this one as well, but it allows me to get in more of a straighter cut, and I don't have to come way off to the side. And I can come in here. And I'm going to undercut then all the way up to that area. And then I know that last little bit, nobody's looking at to see how well I cut that off. I can take that off with a parting tool. One of the things I do like to do though is, if I got something, is I always try to create a signature line since I sign everything. And what I can do is I just got a really thin, you can use anything you want. A pointing tool works good if you got the angle. I don't on this case, so I'm just using a skew that I have. And I can come in here just carefully with the tip, and I can come back behind there and create my signature line on the tool. It's just a little bit of a line, so when I sand it off, we'll see that. So at this point, this piece is ready to sand, and then we would take it off. So hang on. I won't sand it because we don't have sanding stuff here, but I've got one that's already been sanded. And usually what I'll sand is with, depending if I got some, I see one tool mark here, maybe 120, 240 I'll start with, go all the way up to 400. I usually don't go beyond 400. I notice here, I've got one here could clean up a little bit. When you're sanding, I can clean that up, or with the tool, I'll come back and clean this spot up. I just happen to notice it since I can put it back in the chuck. And we can at least get an idea what this one looks like. So that's basically, at a system, I'll have that ready to sand. So I'll just pass this one around. You can see it. I got one that's already been sanded and ready to go. I'll stick in here and we can do the finishing and parting off. That one I didn't mark, but this one I did mark. I do mark my jaw marks for anybody that's new on this. The biggest thing is when you take something out of a chuck, you put it back in, you're not going to be at the same center point. So your angle, your axis will be off a little bit. You'll get it. Now, I'm only going to be turning at the very bottom, at the very top. If you're off a little bit, you can hide it. It's not a big deal. The bigger thing is that I don't want this thing out here whipping around when I get ready to part this off. So that's why I want to make sure I'm very close to center, because a little bit on this end could be a big one on here. And if it's whipping around, there's a good chance that it might snap off. And, you know, the biggest risk is having it fall, hit the lathe and break. So I put marks on here so I can actually put pencil lines. So I'm getting it back in this basically the same place on the chuck that I had it. And you'll notice if you ever do this, you'll feel the little indents when you try and rotate it. That is where it's at. And that's a good way to get it as close to possible, I'll say, is that. I noticed even when I brought the tailstock in, it was off just a hair. But this will give me a chance to get it fairly good in the alignment that I want. Generally, I finish it. I do sanding everything at the one time. I just leave them all on the lathe, but for demonstration, it's easier to do it this way since I'm not sanding. And again, this is just down here just to hold it for the moment. I would sand it. And we're just going to do the finishing. I leave both ends on for finishing for the same reason, that you don't want to forget while you're finishing it, and all of a sudden just say, oh, I'm just going to push the finish on a little bit harder, then you crack it, because we got just basically about a ½ inch or so of space at the back end. Let's see, I'm going to get rid of a couple. I'll leave those up here for the moment. And to finish, for sanding anything, for anybody new, take your tool rest off. Don't try and sand with it on there. You'll forget. Get your hand caught between the two pieces. The same with finishing. I always have a habit. I just take the tool rest off and get it out of the way. For finishing, it's nothing fancy for these. Again, these are decorative parts. They're going to sit on a shelf, sit on a mantle. People aren't going to handle them too much. I just use something simple. Min-wax paste wax. It's my one and done. This is my view. When I make 50 of these in a fall time for the winter, my goal is to get it done as quick as possible to move on to the next one. But basically, it's just min-wax, and I've had this can probably 4 or 5 years at least. It goes a long ways for what you're doing, and basically, I take paper towels, I cut them all up. A lot of times it makes it easier, saves you a lot of paper towel money, but I can see a little wobble on this already, and probably where the wobble is the wood's moved since when I turned it a day ago. And basically I'm just going to do it at a slow speed, mostly because I don't want this stuff all over me being thrown out. And I'm just going to work it into the wood really quick. And with that little bit of a signature line, you can see it. It'll make that sort of pop out in the same sense. But it's really just to come in here, put the paste wax on. It's a fairly durable wax for what the purpose is. And again, you have to think about that. It's not going to be like a bowl or utensil that's going to be handled all the time. It's going to really sit on the shelf. So a very simple paste wax is a simple, good finish for these. I tried a tung oil just for kicks, and I think it took me 4 coats to get to where I wanted to, and I was just wasting an extra hour just sanding, just to get the finish where I wanted it to be. And it looked no better than with the paste wax. So that's a quick, easy way to learn. Again, experiment with finishes if you want to. This one I found seems to work pretty good. And even though I'm going to part the end off, I'm going to finish the end here and we can come back. There'll be just enough to hold that on there that I can do that. The paste wax takes a couple of minutes really to sort of absorb and dry on its own, but it will get pretty close. I can take a towel and buff it off then. I'll take one of the other towels and I'll just buff it real quick. Again, this is not going at a very fast speed when you're doing that. It's not like a friction polish. But a lot of times I can use the overhead lights, and once I start to see a sheen on there, then I know I pretty well got it polished to where I want it to be. And you just have to remember, you don't push a lot because I've got a very small end here. And I'll stop it just to check it, just to make sure it looks good. Sometimes you may miss a spot. I just noticed a little bit of tool chatter in there, but it's not too bad. It's there from a demonstration. And at this point, we're ready to part this off, just to get through that part. Tool stock over to the end. I'm going to part the front end off first. It will hold itself up. A lot of people are surprised. It's going to hold itself up, but this is still fairly thick on an angle on that. And what I'm going to do is really loosen the tailstock up. It's still there, just so I start it up, I can get an idea how much wobble I'll have on that. And then we can do from there. And again, I'm going to turn this off. You can see there's a little bit of wobble. I'm going to turn this, basically that's the speed which I'm going to part it off at. It's not very fast. It gives me some room to work with, but I'm also using my fingers now basically to hold in the center. Now that I feel comfortable, I'm going to take this out a little bit farther so I can get it out of the way when it comes off. So now the center, I'm basically literally using my fingers as my tail center to take that off. And again, the tool's not moving, so I'm not worried about, I'll say, getting cut at this point, but I've got my thumb over here, so if I feel it come through too quick, I can stop it so that it's not going to get into your hand. You don't want to do this. You want to use your thumb, I'll say, in that sense, to control it. So that's why when you're looking at that, I can trim it off a little bit until I got the end off. And it'll come off, just go slow so that you don't snap it off too much. And then what I'll do is just some light sandpaper, and I'll touch that end up. I got 180, 240. I think I can do that with that really quick. Again, fairly slow speed still. And I'm going to touch that end up, so round it nicely, take the sharp point off the end if I need to, and it's not a lot. I'm not going way down the end. I'm just working the end a little bit, but this will work with the grain, with the current sanding I've gotten in there. And I would just, whatever sanding finish you did up on the rest of the tree, get to that section, at least down here, so they'll look uniform. I think I did 300 on the whole tree this last time. I'm ready to do that. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. Not too bad. And then I'll just take my last little bit, my finish that I had on the towel, rub it on there, give it a quick buff, and that's ready to come off. So that's that part, so that's ready now. Bring my tailstock up. I'm ready to take this off, rest back a little bit. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to hold the tree, not lightly, but this is the time when you say, okay, I'm going to put my thumb in between here. You're going to check it before you put it in there. Check, make sure it fits, it's not in the way. And I know I can hold it. It's going to slightly move around. I'm not worried about this jamming my thumb in there because I know all I got to do is push forward, snap the tree off if there was a panic. It's not going to, you just push away from you if you're worried about feeling like you're getting uncomfortably pinched. But again, it's not much of it. You're going to be able to break that little piece off. And I can manage that. Start up slow. This is where it's nice to use a rheostat to remember, because I don't want this. It's a little bit off center, but not terrible. And I can come back here. I'm going to do a little bit more with a parting tool, and then I'm going to come back with my detail gouge to do the final cleanup. So again, remember where you're at. I can do it. I'm just got my fingers between there, so I'm just resting it on there just to give it a little bit of stability. If it breaks off, it's not a big deal. It's just a little more sanding at the back that you have to do. That's all you got to remember. So now I'm just going to come in. And I'm taking my time because I really don't want to snap it off. I just want to get it down to a point where it's probably down to like 3/16 of an inch, where I can come in now with my detail gouge, and I can come through and I'll just push through. And if you can see, I can move it quite a bit, so I got lots of leverage there. And I'll just come in and trim it away. There's our tree, except there's our tree. So, question is, do I ever use a skew? No, I've never used a skew. Yep. I looked at probably the idea. It's probably, and it could be done as it, but I think with the angle, it'd have to be a pretty narrow skew to keep the shape consistent to get in there. So, skews are not necessarily my friends all the time. Skews you have to be careful with them, I guess is the best way to say it. Where I think the gouges are a little more friendly with the turning side. That's a good question. Do I use steel wool to wax? No, just because I only put one finish on it. So that's why I think it could be done. Just once I've sanded it, then I put the wax on and I just leave it go. But yeah, it probably could be something that could be done. Be a good experiment to try it out. Oh, doing an offset one? You mean to change the angle? You probably could do it with an offset. As you get down there, you're going to have to do those finishes I think, based on doing other offset work, you got to do the finish as you go, because as soon as you change that offset, you're no longer on that axis. So you're having, for anybody that doesn't know what he's talking about, is offsetting. So basically, you would have multiple axes, so it actually looks like the top of the tree is being windblown. It's a really cool looking effect. I've not done it, but what you're doing then is you're changing the axis of the tree. I'm just doing this like this, but this way then you have to finish it, I think, as you go, if you want to finish it while it's on the lathe. There's a nice one over there. He's got one. So you can see it. You can see for what we're talking about on the offset. It looks like the wind is blowing the top branches backwards a little bit. Just cool design. Thank you.